The summer of 2022 should have been nothing more than another memory in the endless chain of weekend adventures that filled Mason and Tyler's lives. They had been best friends since high school, both 22, restless, and always searching for the kind of small thrills that made ordinary days feel like stories worth retelling. A quick camping trip into the dense forests of northern Oregon was nothing unusual for them. They packed light, 2 backpacks, a dark green tent, some snacks, bottled water, and a GoPro they swore they'd use to document their weekend. Mason was the organized one, the list maker, the guy who checked trail maps twice before taking a step. Tyler was the opposite, impulsive, funny, the kind who cracked jokes even when they were lost. Together, they balanced each other out, and everyone who knew them said they were inseparable. They left early on a Saturday morning in Tyler's old Subaru, music cranked high, laughing about nothing in particular. Along the drive they recorded short clips on Mason's phone, the road curving into the trees, Tyler raising energy drinks like trophies, the GoPro on the dash capturing their banter. By afternoon they reached the trailhead, a dirt pull-off where the car would remain until they came back. Slinging on their bags they disappeared into the forest, their voices fading with the rustling leaves. By nightfall the Subaru stood silent at the edge of the trail, waiting for 2 friends who would soon return to it. Their campsite wasn't far, just a clearing beside a fast-moving river, where tall pines rose like the columns of a cathedral. They pitched the green tent, laid their gear across a worn picnic table, and placed the GoPro on its tripod. In one video, later recovered from Mason's phone, the 2 grin into the lens, joking about who would catch the biggest fish, even though neither had brought a rod. That evening they roasted hot dogs over a crackling fire. Tyler, always tethered to his music, kept one white earbud tucked in even as he poked at the flames. Mason laughed at him, teasing that he was missing the real sounds of the forest. That night should have been nothing more than a memory. But by the following evening, the first hints of trouble would begin to show. Tyler only grinned, tapping the rhythm of a song only he could hear. Before turning in, they positioned the GoPro to capture a time-lapse of the fire shrinking to embers, their tent glowing faintly in the background. It should have been a weekend like 100 others. Yet sometime during the night, things began to unravel. When Mason's parents hadn't heard from him by Monday afternoon, they assumed the boys had simply extended their trip. By Tuesday, when Tyler's employer called his family to report he hadn't shown up for work, unease began to spread. By Wednesday, both families drove to the trailhead and found the Subaru still sitting exactly where the boys had left it. The car waited patiently, but the forest held no answers. Inside the trees, searchers would soon uncover a scene that raised more questions than it solved. If you don't hit subscribe now, promise me you'll remember this moment if someone you love goes missing. Search teams pushed into the woods and quickly located the campsite. The tent still stood. The sleeping bags were unrolled, half-zipped, as if abandoned in haste. On the picnic table lay water bottles, snacks, and a phone charger with no phone. Even the GoPro tripod remained, but the camera itself was missing. It was the small details that unsettled investigators most. The fire pit had gone cold but not fully doused, suggesting it had been left abruptly. One of Tyler's sneakers rested neatly beside the tent, the other still inside. A flashlight lay on the ground, its dead beam frozen toward the trees. Then came the timeline. The last phone activity from Mason occurred at 11:42 p.m. Saturday evening. A photo posted to his story, showing the glowing fire with Tyler in silhouette, hood pulled up. After that, silence. Tyler's phone cut off around the same time. Searchers combed the area for days. Helicopters swept overhead. Volunteers shouted their names into the trees. Dogs traced faint scents toward the riverbank, only to lose them at the water's edge. Some believed they had drowned, but no bodies surfaced, and the river, though swift, had yielded victims before. The absence of clothing, backpacks, or even trash made the drowning theory feel incomplete. It was as if the 2 had risen from their campfire and simply stepped out of existence. And then, the discoveries took a darker turn. The missing GoPro became an obsession. Investigators believed that if the device had been recording when Mason and Tyler disappeared, it might hold the only answers. But despite dragging the river, scouring the banks, and checking pawn shops in nearby towns, the camera was never found. Weeks turned into months, headlines faded, replaced by fresh tragedies. Families held vigils, clutching candles and photographs, their voices cracking as they begged for information. Rumors crept online. Hikers whispered of strange sounds in those woods, voices in the dark that didn't belong. Online sleuths speculated the boys had stumbled across something they were never supposed to witness. By the summer of 2023, the case was nearly frozen in time. Then, in late July, 2 kayakers paddling a remote stretch of the river noticed a glint of plastic stuck in the mud near the bank. When they drew closer, they found a weather-beaten shape lodged among pine needles and debris, a waterproof GoPro, its casing scarred, moss growing over the buttons. When they pressed the power button, a faint red light blinked once and died. But inside, the memory card was still there, and it hadn't been erased. Check pinned comments and get the survival guide now, because if you don't, who will know what to do when they call you in a crisis? The discovery of the GoPro reignited the case like gasoline to embers. For a year, the investigation had gone silent, drifting into the long shadow of forgotten cases. But the moment that moss-covered device landed on the sheriff's desk, sealed in a Ziploc bag with river mud clinging to it, the forest seemed to whisper again. Detectives handled the GoPro as though it were fragile glass. A technician pried open the casing, drying it beneath sterile lights before removing the tiny memory card inside. The room went still. A collective breath was held as the card slid into a reader. At first, the files appeared corrupted, warped thumbnails and broken timestamps, but they weren't gone. Against every odd, the card had survived a year underwater. The footage was there, waiting, but no one was prepared for what it would reveal. And once the first clip began to play, the mystery of Mason and Tyler only grew darker. This could be the moment you save someone. Don't make later your excuse. Subscribe now. The first clips were harmless, almost cheerful. Mason and Tyler laughed as they hiked, trading the camera back and forth like kids with a new toy. They filmed themselves pulling faces at the lens, showing off their campsite, sweeping over the river as it sparkled in late daylight. Their voices were loud, carefree, untouched by the unease that would come later. Hours of footage showed nothing but an ordinary camping trip. Pitching the tent, laying out snacks, teasing Tyler about his habit of keeping one white earbud in at all times, its glow catching in the dark. The time-lapse of the fire was there too, sparks spiralling upward, their shadows stretching long against the trees as night settled in. But buried deeper on the card, the mood began to change. And what started as laughter turned into whispers in the dark. Around midnight, the camera had been picked up again. At first, only black filled the frame. Then the lens tilted toward the tent, glowing faintly from inside. A whisper, Mason's voice, muttered something indistinct. Then Tyler, sharper. Did you hear that? The view jerked toward the woods. Nothing but darkness. The occasional gleam of eyeshine from an animal, but the microphone, sensitive and unfiltered, caught something else, a low, rhythmic sound. Not wind, not the river. Something closer to words, spoken far away yet unmistakably human. The footage cut, then resumed. This time the GoPro was inside the tent, balanced awkwardly against a sleeping bag. Both boys were in frame, pale in the beam of a headlamp. Tyler whispered, "Voices. I swear I heard voices." Mason tried to dismiss it as echoes, sound carrying off the water, but his eyes kept darting to the zipper. His body tensed like he was ready to run. And then came the clip that made even seasoned detectives shift in their seats. The GoPro, lying on its side, filmed the nylon wall of the tent as something pressed against it from outside. 5 distinct shapes, like fingers, flattened against the fabric, before sliding slowly away. The boys weren't alone in those woods, and what happened next proved it beyond doubt. If you scroll past this and don't get the guide, don't be surprised if one day you're the person who says, "I wish I knew." Check the pinned comment and get it now. Tyler gasped, lunging toward the camera and knocking it sideways. The shot spun, crashed to the ground, and caught nothing but blackness and muffled voices. After that, the footage unraveled into chaos. Flashlights slashed across trees, beams ricocheting off bark. The boys' voices tangled in panic, overlapping in the dark. "Who's there? We're leaving. Don't run. Stay together." The camera bobbed as if clutched in shaking hands, or strapped hastily to a chest. Leaves crunched underfoot. Branches snapped overhead. And always behind their panic, that same low rhythmic murmur. Only now it was closer, circling. The forest didn't just feel alive, it felt aware, and the GoPro was about to capture its most disturbing moment yet. The people who survive these kinds of stories are the ones who pay attention to the signs. If you don't subscribe right now, ask yourself this: what excuse will you have when the signs are in front of you and you miss them? The final clip ran less than a minute. The GoPro angled downward, pointed at the river, water churning pale under erratic flashlight beams. Tyler's voice shouted Mason's name, raw, desperate. A splash erupted. The camera tumbled. For a heartbeat, the lens showed only frothing water and sliding mud, and then, just long enough to freeze everyone who later watched, a pair of boots appeared at the edge of the frame, heavy, dark, motionless. Not sneakers, not either boys. Then, the screen went black. When the lights came up in the sheriff's office, no one spoke. The footage showed no violence, no clear faces, only fragments, whispers, shadows, a hand pressing against nylon. Boots at the river's edge, enough to terrify, not enough to solve. Forensic techs tore apart the audio, filtering, isolating, straining to decode the rhythm behind the voices. Some insisted it was nothing but water and wind, fear twisting perception. Others swore they heard words, something like a chant, spoken in a tongue no one recognized. When snippets inevitably leaked online, theories ignited: a hidden cult, a predator in the woods, or something not human at all. The families clung to the footage with a bitter mix of relief and torment. Relief, because now they knew what Mason and Tyler's last hours looked like. Torment, because the video stopped one breath short of the truth. And if the GoPro couldn't explain what happened, what could? Unless, of course, someone out there already knows. If you really care about the people you love, get this guide. If you won't, at least tell us why in the comments, but don't expect our condolences later. The GoPro, once a toy for capturing laughs and memories, had become their only witness. But like any witness, it spoke in fragments and silences where truth was needed most. Search teams returned to the riverbank with renewed urgency. Dogs circled and barked near an eddy where branches and trash collected. But dredging turned up nothing but waterlogged logs and heavy stones. If Mason and Tyler had been pulled into the current, their bodies should have surfaced long ago. They never did. The GoPro had risen from the mud after a year, but the boys themselves remained missing. And in the silence they left behind, the forest seemed to grow heavier, like it was guarding its secrets. The woods had given back the camera, but not the boys. And that single trade changed the story from a mystery into a storm. The release of the GoPro footage cracked the case wide open. Within days, local news gave way to national headlines. Networks replayed blurry stills of the tent wall, fingers pressing into nylon. YouTube channels slowed the footage frame by frame, enhancing shadows until they looked like faces peering in. Facebook reels spread theories faster than the sheriff's office could respond. Reddit threads swarmed with speculation, each one darker than the last. Officially, authorities called the video inconclusive evidence of possible contact with unknown individuals or wildlife. Unofficially, deputies admitted the boots caught in the final clip were keeping them awake at night. Both families clung to the belief that the GoPro had surfaced for a reason, that somewhere Mason and Tyler might still be alive. But logic gnawed at hope. A year had passed, their tent abandoned, their bodies never found, and yet the footage remained undeniable. Whatever happened to them that night was sudden, terrifying, and unfinished. If the forest wasn't giving answers, maybe it was daring someone to come back, and plenty of people were ready to accept that dare. Investigators retraced every step. Trailhead logs confirmed no one else had signed in that weekend besides Mason and Tyler. Drones skimmed above the trees, scanning for overlooked trails. Forensic analysts froze the GoPro's final frame, zooming in on the boots. The resolution was grainy, impossible for a match. But the conclusion was unanimous. Those weren't sneakers, not hiking shoes, not anything two college kids on a casual trip would wear. They belonged to someone else. Then came the audio. Specialists at a nearby university filtered out the river's roar, isolating the low murmur. What surfaced was worse than silence. 4 steady beats, repeating like a chant. Linguists argued. Some swore they heard words, guttural and jagged. Others dismissed it as pareidolia, the brain forcing meaning onto static. But for the parents, none of that mattered. What they saw was their sons whispering about voices, staring into the trees, begging unseen figures to answer, before disappearing. The footage hadn't ended the nightmare. It had only given it a sound, and that sound would soon echo into darker places. The forest doesn't choose who it takes. Next time, it could be someone you love. Subscribing is how you stay aware, how you see the signs before it's too late. And if you don't want to do that, drop down in the comments and tell us all why you're okay with not knowing. In September 2023, a volunteer search group returned to the woods. This time, they focused on a cave system upriver from the campsite, a place locals whispered about. Floods often shoved debris into its chambers, everything from fishing gear to animal bones. With ropes on their waists and GoPros strapped to their helmets, the volunteers descended into the dripping dark, a grim mirror of Mason and Tyler's final weekend. Hours passed before one of them spotted it. Wedged between rocks in a narrow chamber was a torn scrap of nylon, green in colour. Later tests confirmed it matched the fabric of the boys' tent. Maybe floodwaters had dragged it upriver. Maybe. But to the families and to the town, it felt like something else. As if the forest itself was laying a breadcrumb trail of horror. The caves had given up a piece of the story, but only enough to make the mystery worse. And soon, the trail of fragments would lead to even more disturbing discoveries. Linda, a college friend who had once camped with Mason and Tyler, said quietly in an interview, and they were documenting everything, "It's like the woods wanted the camera back. Like it wanted to show us just enough." As winter closed in, the case twisted again. A hunter, tracking elk near the forest, reported hearing voices. At first, he thought other campers were nearby, but when he stepped into the clearing, it was empty. He described the sound as low and layered, like several people speaking slightly out of sync. He swore one of the voices called a name, a Mason. Authorities chalked it up to fatigue, but online forums exploded. The forest became a pilgrimage site. Amateur investigators filmed themselves at dusk, whispering they'd seen figures between the trees. Some swore they heard laughter carried on the wind. Search and rescue teams warned people away, but still they came, hungry for answers the woods refused to give. Meanwhile, grief hollowed the families. Tyler's younger brother quit hiking entirely. Mason's mother left her porch light burning every night, even in the rain, whispering prayers that her son might somehow still find his way home. The forest wasn't quieting down. It was only pulling more people into its orbit. And then came a report that dragged the case back into the sheriff's office. Don't wait until you're the person on the news, the one everyone says, if only they knew better. Buy the survival guide now, before it's your name in the headlines. By early 2024, the official investigation had slowed, but the GoPro footage still haunted everyone who saw it. A final forensic report landed on the sheriff's desk. No conclusive evidence of foul play. Yet the footage strongly suggested at least one additional individual had been present at the campsite that night. Beyond that, the trail ended. 2 young men gone, their laughter preserved in the first half of a memory card, their fear carved into the second. The woods had returned the camera, but not the boys. And then the thaw came. In the spring of 2024, as melting snow swelled the riverbanks, another object surfaced. A hiker crossing a footbridge downstream spotted something snagged in the rocks, glinting wet in the sunlight. The GoPro had been the first breadcrumb. This was the second. And what the hiker pulled from the river would push the story into darker waters than anyone expected. At first, the hiker thought it was driftwood, just another branch caught in the rocks. Then he saw the smooth white curve beneath the mud. It was no branch, It was an Apple AirPod. Investigators cleaned it carefully, brushing away moss and silt. Tyler's family recognized it instantly. He wore those white earbuds everywhere, even in the woods, always with one tucked stubbornly in his ear. The serial number, faint but legible under magnification, confirmed it. The AirPod was his. It was too waterlogged to function, but its presence mattered. If it had surfaced along the same current that carried the GoPro, it meant at least one of the boys had reached the river. The forest had given up another fragment, small but sharp enough to cut open old wounds. And soon, those wounds would split the entire community apart. The AirPod reignited the debate. Had Mason and Tyler been chased into the river? Had they panicked and fled blindly into the current? Or had someone forced them there? Detectives scoured downstream, dredging silt and combing through debris. Volunteers lined the banks, scanning for any glint of plastic or scrap of fabric. A few items surfaced: soda cans, fishing lures, even a toy car, but none tied back to the boys. The AirPod remained the lone breadcrumb, and with it, theories fractured the town. Some leaned toward the simplest explanation: the boys had panicked, gotten lost and drowned. But others whispered of darker truths, because no one could shake the GoPro footage, fingers pressing against nylon, boots unmoving at the water's edge. Those weren't the kinds of images you could dismiss as coincidence or imagination. Theories were multiplying, and so were fears. And just when it seemed the story might fade again, a chilling new voice entered the case. Your family won't care how many YouTube videos you watched. They'll care if you come back alive. Get the survival guide in the pinned comments. Prove you actually care. Meanwhile, online forums lit up again. Amateur sleuths tore apart the enhanced audio, slowing it, raising the pitch, lowering it. Anything to decode the chant-like murmurs. Some claimed to hear words: "Leave, run." One even insisted a distorted voice called Tyler's name. Experts dismissed it as illusion, but speculation spread faster than the sheriff's office could contain. Then came late May 2024. A search team discovered another fragment, half a mile downstream from where the AirPod had surfaced. Tangled on a branch was a torn black hoodie, stiff with mud, ripped across the shoulder. Mason's parents recognized it instantly. It was the same hoodie he'd worn in that last Instagram story, the one where he stood silhouetted by the fire. Tests revealed nothing useful. No blood, no fibers pointing to an attacker. Just mud, river water, faint traces of pine sap. The hoodie had been in the current too long for certainty, but its presence was undeniable. Another breadcrumb, another cruel reminder, and yet the forest still refused to give back the boys themselves. With every new artifact, the family's grief grew heavier. A camera, an AirPod, a hoodie, always enough to reopen the wound, never enough to heal it. It was as if the woods were playing a long, deliberate game. Investigators widened their search, pushing beyond the banks into surrounding caves and culverts. They recalled an older case from 1998, when Emily Carter's backpack had travelled for miles through limestone tunnels before finally resurfacing. The terrain here was similar, riddled with hidden waterways and underground channels. Specialists mapped the hydrology, tracing how objects might have moved unseen beneath the hills. The conclusion was sobering. If Mason and Tyler had been pulled into that system, then the river had carried more than just their belongings. And in those black tunnels beneath the forest, anything could be waiting. Which meant the search for answers was about to turn even darker. Still, none of it explained the boots, or the pressing hand, or the whispering voices caught on tape. One deputy, speaking off the record, admitted what many already feared. They were scared, he said softly. They weren't just lost. They were running from something. By summer, the case burned hotter than ever. Documentarians pitched series. Podcasters spun theories. Ghost hunters marched into the woods with cameras in hand, daring the same stretch of river. Some returned bragging of faint voices, flickers of light, the eerie sense of being watched. Most came back empty-handed, shaken by the silence of the forest. The sheriff's office tried to rein it in, but the story had already slipped away from them. Mason and Tyler's disappearance wasn't just a tragedy anymore. It was becoming legend. And legends don't stay contained. The forest was about to give up another fragment. Late that August, a hiker bushwhacking near the river spotted something pale buried in moss. A small battered case, its white plastic scuffed and dirty, lid creaking as he thumbed it open. Inside, one lonely AirPod, the other slot empty, the case drained of power long ago. Now both of Tyler's earbuds had been found, separated by miles discovered months apart. Between them stretched only silence. The symbolism was crushing. The forest had returned another piece, but never the boys themselves. By autumn of 2024, the discoveries formed a cruel pattern: the GoPro, the hoodie, the earbuds. Fragments, never answers. Families lit vigils as days grew short, candles flickering against the dark, neighbors whispering prayers or rumors. The woods still held the final piece, and no one knew when or if it would ever let go. For every person who believed Mason and Tyler had drowned, another swore the forest had taken them in some darker way. Exhausted investigators assembled their final report. It labelled the disappearance a likely accident. 2 young men, panicked, disoriented, swept into flood-swollen waters. Clean, simple, official. But in the margins of that same report, officers scrawled their doubts. None could shake the boots captured on the GoPro, the nylon pressed by unseen hands, or the voices that refused to be explained away. Online, the footage became legend. Slowed frames, enhanced audio, still images circled like ghost stories. Some claimed faces lingered in the trees. Others swore hands dragged one of the boys under in the final splash. Experts dismissed it all as imagination. Yet every few months, a new analysis reignited the debate. For the families, the tape was unbearable. Mason's parents kept a copy they couldn't watch. Tyler's brother admitted he replayed it in the dead of night, convinced the truth was hiding in plain sight, and they wanted to be remembered, he whispered once in an interview. And now it's like they're stuck in that camera forever. By early 2025, the case had slipped into the category investigators dread most: unsolved, unforgettable. A trail of fragments, the GoPro, the earbuds, the torn hoodie, always enough to keep the story alive, never enough to close it. And then the forest broke its silence again. This time, the sound didn't come from a camera. In February, a brutal cold snap sealed the river under plates of ice. A lone hiker cutting through the woods near the abandoned campsite paused when the wind shifted. At first it was nothing, just the groan of frozen branches. But then he heard it, faint, low, layered, almost like chanting. He held his breath, straining to listen. The sound ebbed and melted back into the river's muted roar beneath the ice, as though it had never been there at all. But for the rest of his hike, he swore he wasn't alone. The forest had gone from releasing fragments to speaking outright, and no one knew what it might say next. If you think nothing can happen to you, so did Mason and Tyler. Don't gamble with your life. Grab the survival guide today. Check the pinned comments. He told himself it was only water and wind, the tricks of solitude, but when he later re-watched the recovered GoPro footage online, the rhythm of that murmur was the same. For some, that was proof enough. The forest wasn't finished. The last entry in the sheriff's files is dated April 2025. It documents a group of campers who pitched their tent on the very spot where Mason and Tyler had once stayed. In the middle of the night, they claimed the nylon walls of their tent bulged inward, as if a hand pressed against the fabric from outside. They shouted. No one answered. By morning there were no footprints, only pine needles flattened by something heavy. The sheriff noted the account. No follow-up was possible. The forest remained indifferent, withholding everything but silence. For the families, the only certainty was absence. Mason's laugh, Tyler's stubborn grin, reduced now to photographs. 2 young men, swallowed by a night that should have been ordinary and remembered instead as legend. Their story was no longer just a disappearance. It had become a caution, woven into the pines, whispered along the riverbanks, carried by every new hiker who dared step into that stretch of woods. The battered GoPro, its cracked lens staring like a blind eye, sits locked away in evidence storage. The red light is dead. And yet, for those who have seen the footage, it never really stops recording. What happened to Mason and Tyler on that summer night in 2022 remains unanswered. Were they victims of the river's indifference? Or of something stranger, something the forest itself conspired to hide? The land holds the answer, somewhere between the rush of water and the whispers in the wind. But it has chosen silence. It offers only fragments, a camera, a hoodie, a pair of earbuds. Reminders that sometimes the last sound you hear isn't enough to save you. So the case endures, not as a solved mystery, but as a haunting reminder that in some places the trees listen, the water speaks, and the earth itself keeps secrets far longer than we are willing to. The thing about these stories is, the lesson only matters after it's too late. Subscribe now before you forget, before you scroll, and if you won't, then drop a comment. Tell us why you chose silence instead of action. If the forest has rationed out pieces for 3 years, who's to say it won't speak again? If there's one lesson to take from Mason and Tyler's story, it's this. The forest may look peaceful, but it never promises safety. Legends are born because people forget that. And sometimes, the scariest truth isn't that the woods hide monsters. It's that they don't have to. All it takes is one wrong step, one unseen presence, one moment too late. The camera came back. They didn't. And that's the warning the forest has left us with.